The meeting of the Community Services and Public Safety meeting together on Monday, March 20th, 2023. Zendaya, are we in compliance with FOIA?
Yes, ma'am, we are.
And would you please call the roll?
Certainly. Mr. Alfred?
Here.
Ms. Bryson?
Here.
Mr. Brown?
Here.
Ms. Becker?
Yes.
All accounted for, ma'am.
Okay. And can we get an approval of the minutes? We have 6 sets of minutes to approve. We've been busy. I'd like to approve them all at once unless there's any objection to any particular date, those being January 23rd, 2023, February 23rd, 2023, February 24th, 2023, February 27th, 2023, March 1st, 2023, and March 13th, 2023.
So moved.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Okay. Do we need the roll to be called on that? Yes.
I will.
Will
Yes,
you please
ma'am.
call the roll?
Certainly. Mr. Alfred?
Yes.
Ms. Bryson?
Yes.
Mr. Brown?
Support.
Ms. Becker?
Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you. And welcome, everyone. We're glad that you're here to join us today. Zendaya, are there any appearances by citizens?
Yes, we do have one. That's Mr. Frank Babel.
Zendaya, some would argue that I'm a babbler, but my name is Babel.
Did I say Babel? Did I? I apologize.
She did. Zendaya said.
Oh, she did. Okay. It's Monday morning.
I'm losing time already. I'd like to make some comments about beach parking, and I'd like to put it in the context of sharing a couple of experiences that I've had. About a decade ago, the Sea Pines Resort wanted to upgrade its beach club. There was a lot of angst expressed by the fact about the facility, but the sticky point was property owner beach parking. Eventually, more nearby parking was established, parking access guards were hired, and trolley service was expanded. They also added a 10-foot pathway at the beach club that provided direct access to the beach, along with lots of bike parking racks. Since then, arguably, bikes have become the predominant means of transportation to the beach club. During the summer, it's not uncommon to have 500 or more bikes parked there. The North Sea Pines and Lighthouse Drive leisure trails to the beach club site are arguably the most heavily traveled pathways on the island. Sea Pines repeated this approach at the Tower Beach Park redo. They put in a separate wide pathway to the beach to complement the pedestrian-oriented pathway leading to the beach from the parking lot. It too has been a success. And finally, Sea Pines has added crosswalks and bridges to provide cyclists and pedestrians with safe, direct access to the beach that's spreading out the demand. The why of this is obvious. Bikes are fun to ride and family-friendly. They don't take up much space, and bike parking is conveniently next to the beach. They reduce vehicular traffic and the need for parking space and are a way to get eco-friendly exercise in this world threatened by climate change. And finally, once you have them, they provide hassle-free transportation, access to and close-in parking in Sea Pines, in Harbor Town, and other places like that. I mention this now because there are currently 8,000 homes being built in Hardyville, and another 7,000 are being permitted. These are people who think they have moved to Hilton Head, and they will want to use our beaches. I believe we need to seriously look at alternative beach venues and especially alternative modes of transportation to prepare for this coming onslaught. This meeting is about beach parking. It is car-centric, and it's necessary. But I would encourage the town to also include our almost ubiquitous bikeways network as an alternative way to get people to the beach. This is going to require more and better access points and more and better bike parking. A direct route to the beach at Islanders is a start, but much more is needed. Build it, promote it, and they will come. And they, the residents and visitors, also will use their bikes to get to restaurant parks and experience our extraordinarily beautiful island. Thank you. Are there any questions? Thank you.
New business. We do have a discussion on the preliminary beach parking management program, and I'd like to invite Jeff, you first, yes?
Good morning, committee members. I am Jeff Buckaloo, town engineer with the town of Hilton Head Island. And this item today is to give you and the public an update on the beach parking management program. We're going to discuss the operational issues and then policy issues of the program going forward. I'm going to tell you where we've been, how we got here, and then we have some other folks that are going to speak here as well today. This has been going on for almost 3 years, back to the point we hired a consultant, Walker Consultants, who's an expert in the field of assessing and designing master plans for municipal parking programs. We hired them back in 2020. They developed a master plan, came to town council, presented it. Been several public meetings, council meetings, approvals, et cetera. This item is included in the strategic action plan. That culminated in selecting PCI. We're going to issue a contract with PCI to be our parking management consultant firm. The scope for PCI has already gone before council and approved. We did a budget amendment, but there's some follow-on policy issues that Mac DeFord, the general counsel, will discuss here shortly. Timeline, as I mentioned, you can see all the dates, but essentially we've been at this for almost 3 years. And there's been public meetings, public input we've held. There's been committee meetings, town council meetings. And as I said, adopt the scope, the general scope of services for PCI to implement. The budget was amended here in February, second reading, so PCI is ready to go and move forward with the program. The next steps, as I said, it's going to be 2 parts today. I will talk about operations. Mac DeFord, General Counsel, will talk about policy. And we also have 2 folks representing PCI in the room today, and they'll be glad to present their program and what they intend to do as well. Key items, the PCI contract, of course, residential passes, that's always a highly interested folks out there about that. We get a lot of input. I know Aaron and Facilities are dealing with that now. They want to hand that off to PCI as soon as they can. PCI, we signed a purchase order. We had $200K in the fiscal budget this year in the capital improvements program. So there was $200 before we did the budget amendment. We had issued a purchase order to PCI to order materials for the infrastructure upgrades at beach parks. These are the license plate reader cameras, the gates and arms, signs, et cetera. So we fronted that money so they could go ahead and order those materials that may have a long lead time. And PCI has a communications plan that they will work with Carolyn and Kelly to implement town-wide. There'll be links on the websites to talk to each other, et cetera. And then the policy issues will be, we'll need to amend the town code. There'll be a beach parking management ordinance, we'll call it, to talk about enforcement, how rates are set, what authorities are granted to the town manager to administer and operate the program, et cetera. And then, of course, setting new rates if desired by council. The schedule we have, here we are today in March, so we will execute this contract. The residential program, people want those annual passes. So what we have done to date is we have extended the 21-22 decals. We've said people are good to go with that on their car, and that's what's happening out there at Islanders Beach Park in Dreesen currently. The new program will be people can go online to pay, and you will register your vehicle. You get 2 vehicles per property if you're a full-time resident, and you'll register the license plate number. So there will no longer be a decal placed on your bumper. It will be your license plate to your registered vehicle. And nothing is to change with the resident beach pass program. That's been vetted through council. It's $15 a year. You have to be a full-time resident, meaning you live here more than 6 months out of the year. And each property is allowed to register 2 vehicles per property. So all the rules will stay the same. It's just a different method of administering it. We hope it's more customer-friendly and easier for the public. And Facilities, as I said, will hand that off to PCI as soon as we get a contract. Develop communications plan. As I mentioned, PCI has done this all over the nation. They have websites and strategies in place, and we'll talk with Kelly and Carolyn to make sure we're in sync and we can broadcast those mutually. Policy and procedures manual, that's a PCI thing. Here's how we're going to handle our business and operate the program at these beach parks. Capital improvements installed. Those are the gates and arms and license plate readers and signs, et cetera. And technology, that's basically the pay to park and any things we do over the web, things like that. The two green items, now those are policy decisions. We'll have to come to council, and MAC will be taking the lead on that. And essentially it's that new ordinance and setting of the fees. And we're saying a soft launch in January and then full-on launch April. And the distinction of that, I think in January, we'll go out and we'll start charging the new fees if there are changes in fees and everything that is in that ordinance. So enforcement, et cetera. And we'll be, let's say PCI will be more lenient. We'll be working out, are there issues with the texting? Are there issues with communications we need to tweak and make better? And they'll be more lenient on the enforcement, as I said, as there's a learning curve and people need to understand the new program. So we're saying full-on launch in April, but we'd like to start, if there are new fees, start charging new fees in January. And today, as I said, two main focus areas, operations and policy, the residential parking passes. We've always done that, but PCI is going to take it on, public engagement, town council adoption, and PCI full implementation of the program. They're fully equipped. They've got staff ready to go. Like I say, they've done this all over the nation. They're experts at it, so we're quite confident they'll do an excellent job. They have an office located at 32 Office Park Road. That's the complex with WHHI. It's across the street from Harris Teeter Shopping Center. Suite 108 down on the ground floor, easily accessible, close to the beach. Anyone will be able to walk in there if they want to pay cash for a resident beach pass, things like that, or if they would want to question some enforcement that happened to them at a beach park, et cetera. PCI has hired a general manager, Matt Trular. He is on the island ready to work. They are in the process with that $200,000 purchase order, buying the equipment that they'll need to install at those parks to administer the program. They're looking at their mobile solution as an app, not an app, but a text to park. And PCI is here and they can talk about that more, but we think that's the best strategy given the demographics of users. A lot of folks may be here, 1 week a year, a couple days a year, et cetera. And lots of folks have plenty of apps on their phone, and there's other reasons we prefer this. And they'll handle monitoring and enforcement. Our beach operations team will work closely with them, and code enforcement will talk to them as well. But they will staff up. We want a full-time ambassador at Islanders, as town council has said, and or a parking attendant rather, but they'll have ambassadors as well.
Madam Chair, as Mr. Buckaloo steps through these different items, do you want to wait to ask questions?
Yeah, what is your preference? Would you like for us to wait to the end, or?
Yeah, if you wouldn't mind, if that's okay. And when I get to the end of operations, we can go through all those questions before Matt comes up. As I mentioned, the residential pass, no changes to policy, eligibility, fee, any of that. It's just the administration and how we handle the process. But we will, like I say, register vehicles through your registration and your license plate. There will be ground-mounted sensors called pucks, kind of about the size of a hockey puck, in the parking spaces where they can tell availability. There's 30 spaces empty at Islanders at a certain time, or you register your vehicle, you park there and you'll tap on the text to park and say, Patsy Bryson, I'm here in this space. And they'll have a full-time attendant to help folks and enforce, when folks shouldn't be there trying to park at Islanders. Capital improvements, this is infrastructure needed to help them administer the program. Automated parking gates, people will be able to leave. You won't pay as you leave, you'll come in and then pay. License plate readers mounted strategically at these entrances to see the vehicles coming in. The pucks, as I mentioned, at the resident spaces. And then we'll have signs that'll have a QR code. So it'll probably be one sign per parking bay. Let's say if there's 10 spaces here, we'll put a sign that's highly visible, and you can go up there and scan the QR code or text the number and pay for your parking time. Communication plan, PCI, they're going to develop a website specific to our program. It'll be linked on our website. In order to get the residential pass holders on board and make this transition as smooth as possible, they're going to send out a broadcast mailing to everyone who currently has a beach pass and say, would you like to renew? Here's the process. Hopefully most folks will do that online and pay via credit card, and it'll be more simple and expeditious. But they are prepared to start that immediately. And then the communications that we need to reach out to everybody to inform them. What's going to be happening, like I say, the key things are how to text to park, and then if there's any new rates later that come out of the town council meeting this fall and winter, we will update those. And that's what I have for operations, and if there's any questions, I'll be glad to try to answer those now before Matt comes up.
Thank you. It was a
Yes.
great presentation. We appreciate all that information. Alex, I think you may have a question or two.
Yeah,
Okay.
or three.
Or three? Okay.
The first one is the term of the contract. How long is the contract going to be?
We're going to do a contract with a year with the right to renew.
Okay.
We do that a lot of times where we'll go in and, assuming everything's going to go well, but we'll do it for a year, and then if both parties mutually agree, we'll keep going with the same.
And the capital improvement expenditures, if something were to happen, we not renew, the items that are being purchased for the improvements are the property of whom?
Of the town, yeah.
Okay.
There's about $500,000 worth of total capital improvements that we'll be investing in infrastructure at our parks.
Okay, the communications plan, I think, is definitely important.
Yes, sir.
I know we've had previous discussions around how we are letting the public know as to where there is availability. There's going to be a capacity concern, of course. Will the technology be able to communicate on the fly as to availability? For instance, if Caligny is full, we are now redirecting people to the other beaches.
That's to be available on the fly. I don't know if Jack would like to explain the technology and how that functions, but yes, that's the intent. And on where the pucks are in place at the residential spaces, so we've always sold a lot more passes than there are spaces, of course, about a few thousands more than there are actual spaces. But that will be able to tell you wake up at 9 o'clock and say, I want to go to Islanders. You'll be able to look and say, oh, there's 30 spaces available. Or if it's booked, maybe I go somewhere else or don't go to the beach that day. But yes.
Good morning. Jack Skelton. I'm one of the owners of PCI Municipal Services. To answer your question specifically, the public will have a web app that will give them real-time parking availability 24/7. And that will show all of the town's parking lots, whether they're part of the paid program or free. And it has the ability to be flexed into the commercial parking if the commercial areas want to participate as well. And it can tie in things like bikes and all of those things as well. So it's a very powerful solution. But to your point, people will be able to see before they leave their home or their rental property where they can find a spot to park on that given day.
Okay, thank you. My last question in operations, the Folly Field access is one that is on the list to be managed. It is very small and tight. Just wondering if there's going to be a vehicle or opportunity from PCI back to town as to suggested improvements as we learn along the way.
You mean on access driveways into the park, or?
I have no idea what the improvement would be, Jeff. That's why I'm asking the question.
Okay. Yeah, I know it's a tight site, and
So one of the benefits of the technology, we'll be able to broadcast the parking availability, but we'll also know who's using the facilities, and that data can be helpful to planning during the sports seasons where folks have their children registered for event or participate in different programs, we can facilitate their access to the parking during those periods.
Okay, all right. Good enough. Thank you.
Yes, sir. And now I'd like to hand it over to...
Before we go on, let me just make sure
I'm
that...
sorry. I'm sorry.
Patsy, do you have questions?
Yes, thanks, Madam Chair. A couple questions. You mentioned the residential pass program, which a lot of our constituents are anxious to know about.
Right.
And you mentioned that we could have 2 passes, 2 vehicles. So for the cost, remind me of the current cost, and will it be doubled if you want to have 2 vehicles?
It is $15 per vehicle. So, yeah, maximum of 2 vehicles per property, so
So
$30.
$30 per year?
Yes, if you want to register
If you
2
want to
vehicles.
have 2, okay.
Yeah.
And then you mentioned the launch of April 1, so, and that the current decals will carry over. So how long will those current decals carry over before someone has to pay for the buy license tag?
We have extended those, I believe, through April 1st. And what we'd like to do here with PCI is, so we've taken people's license plate registrations on those that have purchased passes. Say someone wants to purchase a new pass, and we say, here's a decal, but you're in the system. Once we go to license plate readers only, you're already in the system. PCI will have you locked in, and you'll be good. But there'll be no more decals. So that's an annual pass. Whether you buy it in January or July, you buy it for that year.
Calendar year.
Calendar year, yes, ma'am.
Yes.
And, so the decals will go away after this, and it'll all be through your vehicle registration. And
Yeah, the reason I'm asking about date for implementation is it's now March 20th. And if this is going to start happening on April 1, then how long is my decal in effect before I pay for this calendar year using just the license tag?
Well, you would, if you had a decal and we have granted an extension for your 21-22 decal, and we said it's good through April 1st, then you will need to buy a pass through the website and register your vehicle through the license plate if you want to continue parking after April 1st.
Yeah, so you see my point is today's March 20.
Yes.
And so how are we going to communicate to folks who want to do that by April 1 that they need to do that by April 1? Because they have a really short window now to be able to pay in order to continue to park.
Yes.
Yeah.
How are we
Let
gonna
us
do that?
consider extending.
Yeah.
Somebody's going to
Yes.
answer.
And to be clear, April 1 is when the portal will open up and we will begin accepting new applications. April 1 is not necessarily the date that we will turn off the existing passes.
That-
We understand, we need to have a transition period of
Yeah, we
time.
can extend.
Ideally, at least 30 days of full operations. But the point being, if you've already paid, you will get a 12-month availability for $15. So if you're still carrying over last year's pass, you'll need to pay, but you've already gotten access for the first couple of months of this year, and you'll get access for the remaining months. Or if you've just paid, it'll get carried over into the new system, and you won't have to pay again for the rest of the calendar year.
Yeah.
But either way, we have to create a transition plan. We can't just turn the light switch on and off.
Right, that makes sense. I just kept
Okay.
hearing April 1. That's me pressing on the point. Thank you. So, yeah. And we're going to save talking about fees until we get to the policy discussion. Is that correct?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, all right. And then Mr. Brown asked about the technology. If the contract with PCI ends, then the technology stays with the town. How about the license for the software for that technology? Where does that stay?
No.
Yes, ma'am. It is not a proprietary solution, so if our PCI's contract were to be terminated for any reason, the town would have the option to continue using the technology as is.
Okay, and would we be paying an annual software license for that?
Yes, and that's already built into a budget that's been approved with the contract and voted on. So all of that is line item detailed in the budget that's been approved.
And if the contract should end, then we would need to pay a continuing software license, I guess?
Yes, ma'am.
If we wanted to continue using it, yes.
Okay, maybe we'll have to sort that out. Okay,
Yeah.
all right. Thank you, ma'am.
Welcome. Steve?
I have a number of questions, but they are more policy related, so I'll wait till after the next presentation.
And I have a couple that I'd like to follow up on. I too was interested about the timing of the changeover. Has there been any preliminary work done? Or are we literally starting fresh now? Has any of that transfer over of current parking with their license plates into your system, has that started?
They've ordered the materials, so.
Okay,
To your point, we have the list of all of the permits from last year, and the plan was to send out a letter to all of the 2022 permit holders to make them aware of the change, give them information on the new process. The system is ready to go. We literally just need to turn a switch, and we're all set.
okay. And so you anticipate those letters going out, that notification going out when? Do we have a date?
By next week.
Okay.
So, yes.
All right. And I think that to Josh's point, an extension is obviously warranted, but some concrete information on that would also be important to share with folks so that they know when they need to get this done by.
And Angie was just reminding me, our last press release and social media push that we had out there on this topic, we had told the public that the current passes would be valid through the end of May.
And the end
So
of
we
May.
actually have even longer than a 30-day transitional period to make sure that we can get everything up and running.
Thank you for that information. I have a question about the two-vehicle registration possibility. And one of the things that comes to mind that bothers me that might be an issue, right, is that, for instance, I'll use myself as an example as I try to do. If our daughter and son-in-law come in and they drive their 7-passenger car because once they get here, adding Grammy and Papa into the car, we can go places in one car than fight with two. Her car won't be registered. How do we overcome that?
Go ahead.
One of the benefits of the new system is that each one of the permit holders will have their own account. So in those situations, they will be able to go in and swap out a plate for a new plate, whether it be a rental car or a situation you just described. So it'll be a lot more convenient for them, and they can do it at 2 in the morning versus having to wait till Monday and go down to an office and take care of it. So that's how we would recommend addressing those.
So so you can go in and it's an instantaneous approval of a new vehicle for a period of time.
Yes, so
And then you can go back in and put whichever car you took off.
correct. So we follow the policy that's been approved by the town. If it's 2 active vehicles at one time, the permit holder would have the ability to change one of those license
And
plates.
there's no time delay.
No.
Okay,
No,
because
it's-
sometimes, they just call and they're on the bridge,
Correct.
at least in my house.
What if there's only one per house? Can you still go in and change temporarily?
Yes, sir. Yeah.
So yeah, even if you sold the car and bought a new vehicle, or friends coming in
Any
and
one
you
of those.
change it multiple times throughout the year, yes.
Okay. And then I guess a question of doing away with physical stickers altogether and thinking about Islanders in particular, where we do have an ambassador or a monitor there who assists our residents. How will they know that the person driving up and wanting to use one of those spaces is a resident with a paid parking?
Great question.
Yeah.
So they will actually be able to scan the license plate and validate that it's a valid permit at that time.
Any idea of how long of a window that takes, the time frame that takes? And I'm just thinking about traffic buildup and
Sure.
Folly Field.
It's almost instantaneous. To give you so these systems are capable of scanning license plates while cars are going 150 miles an hour. So we're hoping no one's driving into Islanders at 150 miles an hour.
Right, but your point's well
Yeah,
taken.
it's very, very quick.
Okay. And, okay, I think that's fine for now. Text to park. You mentioned the text to park and the availability coming up with, is it a website or how does that, can you describe a little bit more about how that works? You mentioned website at one point, but then there was this text comment, and I'm interested in knowing how that works.
Okay. Should I go, I have a little presentation on the
Is it
different
better for later
technology.
when your
Yeah, we wanna-
presentation?
when he
Okay,
does
then
that,
that's
that'd be
fine.
better.
Why don't I hold off on my questions then until after the presentation, and we'll be able to maybe get them all, and get you guys through your
Oh, at the end? Okay.
information, yes.
Okay.
So if, who's next? Is Mac?
Mac,
next?
yes.
Okay,
Yes,
Mac, if you'd like to join us. Thank you, Jeff.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you.
Jeff, how do I switch this?
That advances, yeah.
Okay.
That way it advances.
Thanks.
Good morning, Madam Chairwoman, members of the committee. Mac DeFord, I'm the General Counsel for the town, and I'd like to go through the policy overview of what we on staff are kind of envisioning the beach parking management ordinance, how that would be structured. So as Jeff mentioned, we would need to institute a beach parking management ordinance. And that ordinance, big picture, would be to address two main objectives. The first being to ensure public safety, parking accessibility, and convenience of beachgoers. And the second being to promote the efficient use of parking resources, so for our people and for our resources. Would also be to allow the use of new parking technology solutions that Jeff just provided an overview on for parking management, to define where those paid beach parking areas are, and we'll discuss that a little bit more as we move on, to establish beach parking policies such as paid parking rates, times, and locations, and then granting authority to the town manager to oversee enforcement and administration of the ordinance. So what we're envisioning the ordinance would start with is a purpose and intent statement to make it clear from the beginning what this is for, and this is the purpose and intent statement that we've drafted. The purpose of this ordinance is to establish regulations for the management of paid parking areas for public beach access within the jurisdiction of the town of Hilton Head Island. The intent of this ordinance is to promote the effective use of parking resources and ensure the public safety, accessibility, and convenience of beachgoers. And then we have, I have a summary of kind of the structure of how that ordinance could be structured. So the definition section, authorization for the use of the parking technology, parking fees and resident beach parking passes, which could be adopted via resolution for those parking fees, resolution of town council, hours of operation, and we'll get into that a little bit more, rules, regulations, and exemptions, and then probably everyone's favorite, administrative penalties and fines, and then an appeals procedure for those administrative penalties. We have some key terms here. Public beach access area would be the area designated as a public beach access by the town, so just identifying those general areas where these public access points are located. The paid parking area would be any area designated by the town for parking that requires payment. And we would like to include in the actual ordinance the maps that show where these are. So it's not just listed out in text, but so that if you were to go to the ordinance, you would actually see the maps, there would be a legend, and it would tell you where those parking locations are. The parking authority would be the authorized agency or contractor, in this case PCI Municipal Services, responsible for managing the paid parking areas. And you see I have two definitions here that are optional, and we'll discuss that a little bit more, but depending on how the hours of operation is structured, whether it's determined by the time of year, such as being in accordance with daylight savings time, we could have it defined out by summer months or winter months or some sort of variation of that. Okay, so as Jeff mentioned, there are current code provisions that would need to be amended. They use terms like the coin-operated parking meters, which would be outdated. And this would address allowing for the use of electronic payment systems such as text-to-pay, real-time parking space availability systems, which Jeff just talked about, and then automated parking enforcement tools such as license plate recognition systems. And I did just want to throw in that line there that This software will comply with applicable laws and regulations. There are financial transactions taking place, license plate data being recorded. So we would ensure, and in the agreement that we have with PCI, that data and security requirements are being adhered to. Parking fees, so we're envisioning that town council would establish by resolution reasonable parking fees in accordance with prevailing local rates. And we do have a slide in a little bit going over some studies that have been conducted that will show you some of the local parking rates in other jurisdictions. These rates can be seasonally adjusted and tailored to each parking area, or the same rate can be applied to all parking areas. It's a policy consideration. Payments would be made through the designated payment mechanism. And then the parking authority, PCI Municipal Services, would enforce the parking fees, issue citations, and take other measures to ensure compliance, such as vehicle mobilization and towing. And then we have the resident beach parking passes that current policy exists, and we would move that into this ordinance. Here are some of the studies that have been conducted. They show different proposed hourly rates for different beach parks on the island. And then we also have a recent sampling of North Carolina, South Carolina, and Florida beach communities with an hourly average of $3.72. We've also seen jurisdictions that cap it at a certain point, so there's a maximum daily rate. So you're not paying for, if you're there for 8 hours, you're not paying an exorbitant amount. Okay, for hours of operation, we're envisioning 3 different options that could be considered. You could have hours in operation set in accordance with certain times of year. So we could define what the peak seasons are, the off seasons, such as daylight savings time or some other standard. You could choose an across-the-board hours approach, just a set hours for all year round. And then lastly, hours of operation can be set to each specific parking area, taking into account different parking demands. And then there we have the list of different parking, paid parking areas. And this is the map that I referenced earlier. So we would suggest placing this map in the actual ordinance so that members of the public would be able to see where these are located and be able to gain more information about each park and the rates that are associated with them, as well as the hours of operation. This is the South Island map. Nothing out of the ordinary for rules and regulations, so we would just have simple no parking outside of hours of operation, no parking in unauthorized zones, and then certain areas being reserved for emergency vehicles only. And then, of course, exemptions for emergency vehicles, vehicles of disabled persons with the appropriate placards or license plates, town officials engaging in official duties. And then also for consideration would be an exemption for paid parking for permitted special events, as approved by either town council or the town manager. So ordinarily, the special event permit would be issued by the town manager or his designee. So this is a policy consideration for, would town council approve if the exemption would apply, or would that be left to be determined when that special event permit is issued? We have 2 different approaches for administrative penalties. So these would be administrative penalties again, not, they would not be assessed by the town's general penalty provision. We have a graduated penalty approach, which we think offers a more proportional response to violations. The objective here is not to be too heavy-handed, but to encourage compliance rather than impose punitive outcomes. And we have an example graduated schedule here, where you would have your first violation would be a fine of $50, a reminder of those parking rules, and then those violations would continue to increase, as well as the opportunity for your vehicle being towed or immobilized if you rack up a certain amount. And then the second approach would be a flat rate penalty. That would be very basic for the public to understand and for enforcement personnel. And it would just be a flat rate penalty, regardless if it was your first violation or your 10th. And I just wanted to include a note. The town's general penalty provision would apply if there was any sort of tampering with or destruction of the parking infrastructure. I think this is the last slide. So we're envisioning 2 layers of appeals. The first one would be an appeal to the Parking Authority, PCI. And you would submit a written appeal to PCI within 30 days of receiving the citation. They would issue a determination from that. If you were unsatisfied with that decision, you could make an appeal to the town manager or his or her designee, and that decision would be made within 30 days of receiving that appeal, and that would be a final decision. And that is it for the policy discussion.
Thank you, Rick. Appreciate all the
Yeah.
information. We'll start with Steve this time.
My policy questions, in general, I will wait till the end, but I have one specific question, and that is, if parking charges start at a designated hour, 8 o'clock or whatever in the morning, what happens if you get there at 7?
I would leave that.
Because I've seen that happen in the New Jersey shore.
That actually happens every day in cities across the country. And so the technology would allow you to do a prepay session that wouldn't actually start until the paid period starts. So they would be able to go in and scan or text to pay in advance of the payment period.
Or could they get in early and get a better parking spot?
Yes, well, if that's the policy, yes, sir.
Okay.
Yeah.
Any other questions, Steve?
I'll have them later,
We'll
thanks.
have them later. Okay. Alex?
So, thank you. This is a question around policy. I'm trying to think ahead as far as unintended consequences, okay? So in our purpose and intent, we're saying out loud that we want to protect public beach access, but we're also saying that we are looking to promote the effective use of parking resources. And the parking resources isn't necessarily germane to what the town owns or controls, at least in my opinion, in the way that it's broadly written here. And then we go on to the rules and regulations, and we're saying no parking in unauthorized zones. And I'm making an assumption that we're talking about unauthorized zones that are within the town's purview. So we have been operating in this free environment for so long, and once we start to go to a charged parking experience, there's going to be a transitional period, of course, but I see folks still searching for that free opportunity. And by no means am I suggesting that PCI is responsible for enforcement in other areas, but I think it needs to be addressed through our policy to do so, okay? Folks are still parking on folks' front yards. We've got a lot of commercial entities that are in close proximity to what we're talking about. So how that's handled, I think, needs to be spelled out in our policy. And right now, I'm not necessarily seeing that. I think that's something we can definitely improve upon. The second, when we start to get into, I guess, setting the rates or the exemptions, will staff be bringing forth to us some type of study as to the current usage of the parking areas, because some of these are mixed use. They're beach access and they're also access for recreation. Chaplain Park would be a prime example, okay? And I know we talked in the past about having some exemptions, but having a clear understanding as to the demand, I think will be important as we're setting the policy forward. I know I'm emotionally attached to the recreation piece, okay, but I think there are other factors that we may not know about that will have some type of effect on our ultimate decision, okay?
Yes, sir.
And I guess the last one that I had was the appeal process. I think understanding a little bit better as to what the criteria that PCI will be using, and also some type of criteria that our town manager, if we choose to go that direction, will be adhering to, I think is critical. You know, number one, for our brand, but secondly, you know, I just want to avoid too big of fights around parking. But those are my, not necessarily questions. I know you're looking to build policy, so I wanted to make those observations. Thank you.
Yes, sir, thank you.
Thank you, Alex. Patsy?
Yes, ma'am. Thank you, Madam Chair. Several things about the ordinance structure itself. Recognizing that an ordinance is the effect of a law and a resolution is more establishing the policy, and resolutions have more flexibility. So with that being said, these are the comments that I have about the structure of the ordinance. First of all, the parking fees and hours of location, I don't think those should be in the ordinance. The authority to set those ought to be with the town council, and ought to be done by a resolution so that we have the ability to adapt more quickly. That'd be my comment about that. Authorization to use technology, I think, is great, but I'm also concerned about making it too restrictive by language. So we ought to have some sort of broad ability to use different kind of systems and solutions, and not limited by whatever technology there is at the time. You also mentioned the maps, and when I pull up the maps, I see that Alder Lane beach parking, I'm familiar with that, but across the way is the Alder Lane beach access, and I hope we're not going to have parking there. I don't know why that is shown on the map. That's a pathway, a walkway, and we should not have any parking there. Cars should clearly not be on that pathway, so I think that should be removed from the map. And by the same token, if the maps, I understand the reason for reference to a map, it helps people to find it, but I'm also concerned about that being in an ordinance, because what if we decide to make some changes to a park? Then we have to go back through the process to adopt an ordinance or amend an ordinance to do that. So perhaps we could have a different kind of reference to it. And I do like a map over text. I think visual is very helpful. But I'm just concerned, number one, about that Alder Lane pathway, and then secondly, about being locked into an ordinance. Then the definition of parking authority, authorized agency or contractor responsible for managing the paid parking areas. If the town wanted to be the parking authority, then I think perhaps the language should be the town or its designee by written agreement, so that we have that ability in case the town says, oh no, we want to be the parking authority. I'm not saying we should do that. I'm just thinking about broad language in an ordinance. Then, let's see, sorry, these are operations. The kind of exemption language, make sure that's broad enough so that for a special event, we don't have to come back, wait for a town council meeting to decide when to make an exemption for a special one. If the authority is with the town manager, as long as he behaves, we'll be okay with that. But and we should be okay. I think I already mentioned about the hours of operation. As far as the flat penalty versus the graduated, I like the graduated. But I'm not sure we want folks to get all the way to the 4th. I think we should be towing them after the 3rd. You said
Foretelling?
Yeah, well, yeah, a fine, a heftier fine perhaps. I like to graduate is what I'm saying. But when they get to the 3rd, I think the fine should be heftier and towing. And I don't think anybody should be allowed to get to the 4th, in other words. That's just my personal view. Then with regard to the hours and the recommended fees, I appreciate that there's been some study. That's what I was going to ask about, so I was glad to see that information. The other thing, in addition to a daily maximum, I think there should be a maximum number of hours. So if I want to go park my car at 7 o'clock in the morning and not get it till, I decide to go see the stars out at night, then I've taken up a space all day. So perhaps a maximum number of hours. And then commensurate with that, the ability, so I don't have to run back from the beach every 2 hours and feed the meter, so to speak. I suppose one could do that remotely with a credit card, but I'm not particularly interested in taking all my credit cards to the beach with me. Maybe some folks do that. I mean, I know you can do it by phone these days. I do that myself. But some way of managing the maximum number of hours and the ability to pay, because when we travel, we have had the occasion of having to run back to the parking meter, or at least within a reasonable proximity to be able to connect with the technology to do so. So I was just calculating it. If you want to, say, spend a half a day at the beach and you do 4 hours, that's $16. So will you be able to pay $16 for your 4 hours? Or if you wanted to stay 6 hours, you pay $24. And then, as you mentioned, perhaps there's a daily maximum. But I think we don't want folks to take advantage of blocking up spaces all day long either. Some way of having some sort of system of turnover during our high seasons. And then lastly, as Mr. Brown was asking about, somewhere within all this, we need to understand how we are balancing the interest, especially in the Coligny area, of area merchants and residents within that area, so that if there's paid parking at Coligny Beach, what happens then? As Mr. Brown suggested, they're going to be in search of free parking. I've done that myself in other, where we visited other places. So what can we do to help with that balance without becoming the enforcers of private parking lots? But what is that mechanism to help out? And that's what I think Mr. Brown was suggesting, something in our ordinance, something in our policy to be able to address that. And then he also mentioned Chaplain Park. I agree with that. There's got to be some balance for those using recreational use and those for beach use. And I think we're working on the balance at Islanders Beach Park, but it's another area where there's a balance between those who live there and those who are trying to go to the beach there. So, and those who are residents versus the limited number of parking meter spaces which we're currently required to have. So we need to be able to address those balances somewhere, and the staff needs to help us with a recommendation of how to do that, having held a number of community meetings. So make a recommendation on how to balance.
Yes, ma'am. Thank you.
Thank you, Patsy. All right. So sometimes our policies drive the ordinance, right? So some of my questions may be policy-oriented, but the outcome is what we're actually doing and what we're requiring and what the effect of that is going to be. And so speaking of balancing, as I recall from previous conversations going through this process to get to where we are today, there was an opportunity within the system, say for Coligny, to be open to changing the parking requirement so that when soccer practice started, for instance, at 3 or 4 o'clock in the afternoon, the fees would drop, and there's whatever the time may be, I'm just throwing out times, that the fees would drop so that soccer parents could come, or tennis players, whatever, pickleball, as it might very well become, would no longer have to be subject to that fee, correct?
Yes.
Want to make sure that I remember that correctly from the past. So that is built into the system for that availability. So those determinations are yet to be made, as I understand those specifics. I would be interested in knowing, let's stick with that for a second. I'm curious because we do have a lot of discussion that's happened over the time about businesses and their use of parking that otherwise now might be restricted to them, and whether there's an opportunity within our policy to allow a business to purchase a business qualified parking permit for employees, what that might look like to help alleviate that concern that we've, I'm sure, all heard about. So just a thought on that. In terms of citations, how does that happen? Is that a paper citation that's given? Is it an email that someone has made a transgression? Or how does that work?
So I'm glad you asked that question. So none of the enforcement will be automated. It will all have human intervention to make sure it's accurate. The technology is in place to help facilitate efficient enforcement. So there will be a notice placed on the vehicle for all cars parked in violation.
Who places that there? Is
That
that
would be
dependent on
one-
code or y'all are?
That would be one of PCI's employees.
So there are employees, who are going throughout the island to the various parking locations, identifying those that have been there past their time,
Yes,
placing a citation.
Yes, with the camera system, it will be in real time comparing vehicles arriving in a parking lot. They'll be given a grace period in which they can take the time to pay. That can be established based on resolution policy. And if they exceed that grace period and have not made a payment, they're going to show up on a digital list of potential violators. And so the PCI local team will be able to view that in real time. So we're very efficient. We won't have to go to Alder if there's no violators. If there's 7 at Coligny and 2 at Islanders, they'll direct their efforts appropriately to be most efficient. So.
Okay, so that's good information. And then obviously records are kept of that so that the fines can be sent at that point, or is there some description on the citation as to how they pay?
Yes, so the citations themselves we managed in software. And the software, once a citation's been created, it will be available instantaneously online for the customer to appeal or to pay. If they want to do an appeal, that can be done online as well. They fill out an online form. The initial process that we discussed is for the PCI to do an administrative review to make sure there's not any anomalies or a mistake that was made in that citation. We don't want to clog up the town's resources dealing with those sort of things. Everything is documented and tracked. Any citations that are voided, dismissed, warnings that are issued, all of that will remain on record so that there will be no opportunity for anything to go astray of requirements.
And all of that recording is part of the periodic report back to town council. Is there a point in between that recording of the information in the report where if there's something that's going wrong, you report to, or who do you report to that information if there's something that's of a more of immediate nature?
So that'll be determined. Access to the data will have to be determined as well. The system is capable of publishing anything that the town wants to different staff members.
Right, and that was one of my concerns previously, the collection of all that information. And I remember you telling me that y'all don't keep that, that is the town's. And I'm probably going to have more questions about how long we keep that information. Would these, for instance, if there was a first violation, a second violation, and 1 year, does it roll over to a second year? Is that a question? Again, I apologize if I'm outside of the categories of questions, but.
You can do whatever you would like. We can make recommendations on what other municipalities have done and the effect of those programs. So that you really have a blank slate on what you'd like to do there.
Okay, so I think that that's a thought for consideration in terms of, can the first violation carry over for multiple years? I am also concerned about, and maybe this plays into some of the person who's going from a variety of different places getting the information, but I am concerned about the folks who will try to skip out and find a free spot in someone's driveway or down a private road and cause more traffic issues than we currently have, as we know, especially, well, everywhere, that are parking and traffic issues are important to us.
That's a term we use is bleed over. Once you initiate new paid areas, there will be some bleed over. We help consult on that as far as, you'd mentioned employee parking options. So we do a lot of what we call hospitality parking programs for other cities, where we designate areas and special permits for those folks to park. And when we get into the technology piece, I can talk a little bit about how the businesses can interact with the same technology, even if they manage their parking areas themselves. So there's a lot of opportunity to work together with the business community to come to a harmonious resolution.
And so integrating the two from the town, from your company is not going to be issuing those citations for people who are parking in someone's driveway or blocking their driveway or down a private road. So code enforcement is responsible for that. And I just want to hear a little bit in terms of how those citations and those warnings and that structure will come together with what we're doing here, planning for what you're doing as our parking organization.
Is your question for parking violations that would occur outside of the parking areas? So that would be handled either via code enforcement, I saw Bob just a second ago, or the sheriff's office could be called, and that would be administered under the ordinances that generally govern them currently, likely in accordance with the general penalty provision.
So I'm just wondering, since this might push people to doing that more often than they might have in the past, how we integrate the two so that those violations also count towards the penalty structure here in the ordinance, or if there's any way to link the two, since anyway.
We could certainly look into seeing how that could be linked together.
And then the other question that I have has to do with gate operations. So if we're establishing a time frame where the gates will open and close, we're putting in new gates on many of the parks, the opportunity for that 6 a.m. arrival, which would be prior to, really doesn't exist. Am I correct? I mean, it shouldn't, right? Okay. Okay. All right. I think that's all of my questions that I
Madam
can
Chair.
ask at this time, but Patsy, see?
Yes, if I might, following up on what the chair is talking about, I think we need to strengthen our other penalty provisions for those, what do you call it, the bleed-off parking, and that might help some of the merchants. For instance, and I don't know whether or not it's legally permissible, but if someone parks illegally in a private parking lot or private driveway or on the street, then for the enforcement mechanism to fall back to the town would also assist those local businesses if that can be done. I'm not saying that we are going to be policing the private parking lots or driveways, but where there are violations, then work in concert with those businesses and work in concert with those residents. And let's strengthen our other ordinance so that we have that as strong as this will be as strong to prevent that bleed-off parking. So maybe that's a way to help balance it. So I agree with the chair on looking at that. But let's be tough.
Questions now.
Yeah, sure. Steve?
The other members of the committee have raised some of the things that I'm concerned about, so I'll get into them right now. Instituting paid parking is the first thing that the public's going to react to is where can I park for free? And I think we have to give a lot of consideration dealing with that, and it has several aspects in my mind, one of which is bicycle parking. Do we have adequate bike racks at the various places? Because one of the things people will think about is, how do I get there without a car so I don't have to pay? So I think we need to know what's going to happen in regard to bicycle parking facilities. The second matter is that we've had parking at USCB campus with shuttles. Is that intended to continue? And are there other opportunities if that lot gets filled up? Because that'll be a free parking, to my understanding. And the third aspect of that, which has been alluded to, is that the first place I think a lot of people with cars are going to think of as an alternative is the Coligny Shopping Center. And that is an important asset for this community, and I think there has to be means of dealing with their facilities. There was brief reference that you made, I believe, to potential arrangements for employees, and I think that needs to be elucidated as to how that operates. But the second aspect is there's a lot of public there that parks there as well. And so I think we're going to end up with people who are going to park in Coligny to go to the beach as a means of avoiding the paid aspects. And that concerns me. And I think we need to think about what, if anything, we can do about that. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Steve. And then they're really not questions, but I do have comments. In terms of the appeal process, the town manager as the decision maker, we have a phenomenal town manager who is capable of doing many, many things at the same time. I would want to hear from him, certainly, but I think this is an additional burden that perhaps shouldn't fall on his desk. I don't know what that means in terms of where it does fall, but I'm not looking to add to his workload with regard to parking appeals. So there's that. And I disagree with the idea of limiting the time frame in which someone can park in a parking spot. If you go and you're willing to pay, you should be able to stay and go to the beach, have lunch, shop, have dinner, have drinks, whatever the case may be, as long as your car is out by the time we close the gate. And which is obviously another question, what if people don't leave before the gate closes? So those are some specifics. And in terms of the time of the citation, the ranking, I don't think you need four violations before you know that we mean business. I would shorten that, and I would make the penalties steeper on the last. And am interested in hearing more about how we arrange a towing policy. I imagine towing a car out of where it is more complicated for everyone, more expensive for everyone, may send a bigger message to those who are in violation. The idea of just booting them takes up a parking spot, and for how long, and has its own complication associated with it. So those are just comments that I have with regard to those particular issues. And I just want to make one clarification. When I said a business able to buy a number of permits, not for their private parking, obviously, but perhaps if we were to think about that in terms of how to solve this problem with our businesses who utilize beach parking currently. That makes sense. Yes, sir, Steve, you're free to.
One other quick question is, I understand that there is a parcel available to the town on Pope Avenue that might have some impact on parking, and I'd appreciate a staff reaction to that at some point.
In response to that, Mr. Alford, to the extent that any real property would become available, staff would discuss it with town council in executive session per our standing protocols.
Thank you.
Okay. Any other questions come to mind? It's a great conversation, a tremendous amount of information, and thank you for all the answers and taking notes. I see everyone writing, and if anyone from our committee has specific questions related to this that perhaps come to mind later, an email to Jeff is a good idea, and I know that Councilman Stanford and Ames are here taking notes as well, and if you have questions, feel free to jump in.
Madam Chair, I'm
Thank
sorry. Did PCI also want to make some
Yes, yeah,
comments?
that is
Sorry.
I just want to make sure that we get that out there.
Advances.
All right. Well, I wanted to go over some of the big technology pieces. Some of this we've already discussed here. The first section is the virtual permitting program, which would replace the current paper sticker program. And the idea here is to allow each one of the residents to set up an account. Now, in order to do that, they would go through a process. Hopefully, most of them will choose to do that online, and they will be able to register their vehicles, their information, make payments. The required documents by current town ordinance could be uploaded for proof of residency, so we make sure only proper residents are permitted in the program. And then in future years, the renewal process will become much easier for them. We can create more of an automated click, check the box type program for them to make it simpler. For those folks that prefer not to go the digital route and use computers, we'll still make access where they can come to the parking office and fill out the paperwork and pay for their payments if they even want to pay cash. We could facilitate that as well. And as a hybrid, if people want to download a form or come to town hall for a form and fill it out, we'll accommodate. The goal is to make it, give options for everybody. But for most people, I think they'll find it's much easier for them to use. This QR code actually on the screen now, and we'll make sure you have a copy of this. You can scan that and actually go through the process and see what it's like to register for a permit. Just registering doesn't authorize the permit. There is an approval and review process. I just want to make sure everyone's aware of that. Any questions on the permitting?
I was going to ask if it were live. I'm ready to take a photo myself. Okay. But I guess it's going to be part of the launch, April 1. You said there's an approval process, so if you're not approved, does that follow that appeal process? If you don't approve me and I want to appeal, how do I do that?
Well, usually the approval is going to come down to submitting the proper documentation. And so if they fail to submit a current document, for example, most likely what's going to happen is Matt or one of our team members will email them back and say, hey, the form you submitted it needs to be this, or here's the issue. We don't expect a lot of folks to apply for a permit if they're not actually a resident. So, but if there is a case, we will escalate that to Jeff and get the town to weigh in on that situation.
Okay, thanks. And Cindy, I apologize, I forgot to turn my microphone on, but it's on now.
The other thing I wanted to point out with the permitting is it's flexible. So if the town did want to create different types of permits, whether that be, we talked about the hospitality rate for folks at work, it could also be business permits, short-term rental permits. It has a lot of flexibility to accommodate the policies that the town would like to see in place. So it's a somewhat future-proof solution for the town.
Can I follow up on a question that you gave me before, which was a great answer, but thinking about it a little more and thinking about the application, that ease of going on and changing the approved resident permit to someone, as in the example that I gave, our daughter who has a bigger car, blah, blah. What if a someone who owns a rental
Sure.
chooses to use the same opportunity to transfer their approved permit to a weekly rental and change it over and over? And we bypass what it is that we've tried to do with regard to allowing residents only to buy these parking permits.
That would really come down to a policy decision of the town and how you wanted to deal with those situations. The system is capable of limiting the ability to change those license plates. For the general residents, the typical residents, it's been proposed where they are able to change that. Rental cars, different situations we've discussed, but that can, by policy, be changed.
I think it's something that we have to make sure that we've teased out. I know that we have a residential definition, and if we're using that same definition, I can see how you could put those protections in place, but if we're talking about a 6-month resident, that might be a different loophole. Yes, so Josh?
In furtherance of that, I think having the flexibility to account, if your grandkids are coming in 6 times a year versus 8 times a year, we're not going to know what that number is, but allowing for the flexibility to account for that. And not forgetting that we're also creating a database of addresses for all of our short-term rentals that we can then cross-reference against in terms of excluded properties. And so I think ultimately using the technology and using the data that we're gathering, we'll be able to come to a system that accounts to a large extent for those flexibility options, but then also prohibits people who are not residents from being able to register.
I think that's going to be important, getting those addresses and having that capability within your technology that works. I don't know if it solves all of our problem, but at least it's one element of going down. Okay, I think we need to keep an eye on that, just make sure that we've looked at it closely. I'm sorry for interrupting.
No. All right. The mobile payments. So this is the primary means that folks that aren't a resident will pay for their parking fees. Here's actually a draft of a sign that we've floated out there. Obviously, the rate is yet to be determined, but these signs will be placed on the lots where there is paid parking required, and it would give them the opportunity to either text to initiate a payment. There's a unique code per facility, or they can simply scan a QR code and begin their process. So once you have made a transaction, when you return, you have less information to enter, so it becomes more efficient after you've made your first transaction. The system remembers your cell phone. Every cell phone has a unique identifier, and that's how it remembers that. So it should be a very efficient way for people to pay for their parking. Another positive thing about the technology, if you paid for 4 hours, but it's going on 4 hours, you'll actually get a text reminder that says, hey, your parking session will expire in 15 minutes. If you would like to add more time or purchase more time, you can do that remotely without having to run back to your vehicle and interrupting what you're doing. That, of course, can be limited. In different environments, they do limit that. They only want you to be able to purchase for a certain amount of time. So that is a benefit for that. The system is also very flexible in rates, whatever the policies are. If they're unique by facility, unique by hour, unique by day, whatever you want, it can be changed in a matter of seconds in the back office, including events. If you have event parking at Coligny, for example, and you wanted to change the rate to a $10, $15, whatever it may be, for a special event, you can do that as well without having to change and add a bunch of signage and things like that. The other thing I wanted to point out, and this ties into the questions regarding the businesses, the system also has a capability to accept validations. So the businesses, for example, in Coligny Park, would be able to validate their customers' parking. So I'm actually going into the coffee shop, I'm actually going into the store. It could be as simple as this, and we're doing this with other municipalities. On the clerk's, the front desk, or the hostess stand, they have a sign with the QR code. You simply scan that, enter your license plate, and now I'm validated. And that could be a purchase. For example, if they wanted to pay for their customers' parking and they were in the town's Coligny parking lot, they could do that if the town chooses to offer that policy. And additionally, within their own commercial lot, it would be a way for them, if they chose, using the same sort of technology or this exact technology, they would be able to identify who's parked in their parking lot that is actually a customer at the time. So there's a lot of technology features that would benefit the commercial operators as well. And, of course, there's always going to be questions. So part of the program that the town was excited about was having a 24/7 call center. So if anyone has an issue paying, questions about policy, whether it be 2 in the morning, which they shouldn't be parking then anyways, but they will be able to get someone on the phone that has answers, or direct their call to someone that will be able to help them. Any questions on the payment side?
I just want to make a comment. I'll go back to us having as much information up front. I know that's a tall order because we have not had the technology to do so, right? But I think Madam Chair mentioned that there needs to be a constant communication between your services, town staff, back to town council, so that we can be very nimble as we move forward, because information will be available. Because today, if you were to say to us, well, what does your validation program look like, we will be guessing. And we have no idea if that's going to be satisfactory to the business owners or not. So the nimble piece of it, I think, is important moving forward.
Yes, sir. And we will, based on the schedule that was presented today, we will actually have a lot of data gathered before you have to decide on the rates. So we'll have, once the camera system is in place, we'll be able to come back to you and tell you at 10 a.m. on a Tuesday, here's how many cars were parked and here's how long they were staying in each one of the parking lots. So that should be useful information. And it's something you want to monitor over time because things change. And as you make policy decisions on rates, what impact does that have? Projected and real. You'll be able to have that data, which most cities don't. So I'd be pretty excited about seeing this play through.
I think that data collection, as we're moving through this process, is going to give us a whole host of information that will become very important. And Alex, you may have been reading my mind as I wrote down the validate, and there's like 6 questions I have with regard to how that would all work. But it's another conversation for us to have before we move forward implementing that. Patsy, did you have any questions? Are we at the end of your presentation?
I've got a couple more slides.
Okay.
Oh, wait, I'm good.
Okay. We briefly touched on this. So this is the web app that people will be able to access to find available parking. It's through a company called Modi. And what they do is they digitally map your parking assets. So for you, it would be all of the town parking lots. As I mentioned before, that could be expanded in the commercial space if that was the decision to be made. This is actually one of our operations in Lawrence, Massachusetts. This one is on street. So you can see where the color code tells people where available parking is. Those color schemes will actually change based on real occupancy. So if a lot is red, that'll signify to them that it's full. We don't have to give exact space counts, and the reason you don't want to do that is because if I'm at home when I look at that, I don't want to, things can change by the time I actually get to the lot. So we use that sort of statistical modeling to give them the predictive occupancy when they would get there. The occupancy can be isolated for specific uses. Based on what I'll show you on the next slide, we have sensors that can monitor down to an actual parking space. But this will help folks and find available parking, hopefully less driving around, less frustration if they're trying to get to the beach. They can find the best available. And on here, we can display things like free parking. I know we've discussed in conversation Fish Hall being a free area. So things like that could be designated in this program. The other feature I wanted to point out is you can put in a destination and it will automatically bring you to the closest available parking area. So that's a way to help with wayfinding as well.
And within that, though, we don't account for the opportunity to park at USCB or other parking arrangements that we have for the season, correct? So would those be highlighted in this parking finder?
They could be included in what we call the inventory of available parking.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, absolutely they could.
Okay, good. Thank you.
Sorry,
sorry.
it generated the map generated a question for me, and that is, at Islanders Beach, we have a certain number of parking meters. Also at Alder Lane, there's parking meters. So are all those parking meters going to disappear? And we're going to have the, I forgot what you call it, hockey pucks in all those places. And for instance, with Islanders Beach, there'll be the residential permits, which will have so many spaces, and then there'll be the parking meters that will have so many spaces. And so will you be able to find the data differently, like a metered parking spaces versus a pass space in each of the available facilities?
So as far as,
Yeah, well, I think the meters will disappear at Alder Lane, but the Islanders Beach Park, as we, briefed
have dead
council on
meters.
before, how there are 25 spaces that we obligated ourselves to maintain there via a grant from DHEC for $1 million to place sand on the beach. And so those 25 spaces are there now, and I think probably best to leave those meters and have the public, pay there. And as we do park improvements, we'll do a capital upgrade to that park. And what we want to do is put those parking spaces out on Follyfield Road. So the public parking spaces and the meters will be out in the right-of-way on the roadside of Follyfield Road, and then those folks will park there and then walk through the park to the beach and not have to go in and intermingle.
So there'll still be the old-fashioned meters where you put coins or
I
something
think
in
at
there?
Follyfield Road, unless we want to do a new technology, but it's going to be separate and distinct from the residential.
But you want to be able to tell how many of those spaces are available, which, and the reason I'm raising this question, well, because I want to know the answer, of course, but, and I think the public in general, especially residents, want to know about Islanders Beach Park, is also because if there are limited parking meters, parking spaces paid for non-residents, then wouldn't it be great for them to be able to know instead of driving down there? So I think we ought to have that not, thank you.
Yeah, as they do with the
Mr.
on-street
Graver
parking.
nodding his head, thank you.
And in particular, I'm sorry, Alex.
Before Jeff left, I wanted to just another thought. And I'm going back to the free parking options. And I can appreciate that being embedded in this parking finder, but from a town communications standpoint, I think it's important that we are saying out loud that there is still free parking. Example would be the shuttle that's moving from USCB and other areas on Hilton Head. Just that promotion, I think, is important so that we can potentially cut down on the amount of cars that are coming to this area.
Yes, sir, absolutely. Whether it's an economic decision and I don't want to pay, or the lot's full, right, we'll need to promote those. And yeah, free parking and shuttle service will be available at USCB.
And I just want to go back to Islanders for just a moment to make sure that currently those 25 metered parking spots are available to residents permit holders, and the same would be the case wherever they're located. And I've already made my opinion in terms of on the street, not thrilled. But I want to make sure that those remain also available to permit holders, because that's the way it is currently. So if you get to the Islanders Beach and one of those spots are available and you have a resident permit, you can park there. Looking for consistency there.
Yes.
Okay. And then secondly, I'll be bold and say what I think, and hopefully bring up a bigger conversation. We obligated ourselves apparently until the end of time by taking $1 million and have 25 parking spots that have now limited the availability of our residents to use Islanders Beach in particular. I will be bold and say I think it's time to give them back their $1 million and take us off the hook and remove those parking spots. And bikes, I think we've all, Frank mentioned it, talked about that availability of biking. And bike racks is going to be increasingly important as we implement this. So I think we need to be able to make sure that we have whoever it is who makes those beautiful decisions, DRB, whoever it is, and that we placing more bike racks within our parks. Help cut down. Okay, I'm sorry, we keep interrupting you, but it's a great conversation. Thank you.
No worries, no worries. So the technology for the residential restricted spaces, so only residential permits can park in these spaces, there's 153 total currently. And each one of these spaces will be outfitted with what we've been calling the hockey puck, but this is actually what it is. It's a ground sensor that will sense when a vehicle is parked in that space. And that sensor will give us real-time availability of those 153 spaces, which will be pushed to the parking finder. So they will actually see those spaces, availability whenever they want to look. These sensors are what we call smart sensors, so they're able to detect Bluetooth connectivity, which does a couple of things. One, we definitely want the resident to register when they use those spaces, and that can be accomplished in two ways. One, on their phone, they would have an app, and they would simply, when they parked, it would take them about 5 seconds. They would go in, open the app, and register that spot, and then we would know that it's not only an occupied space, but it's occupied by John Smith, okay? The second option, which is a convenience option for the resident, if they want to, they can purchase a tag, a key fob, that they could put on their key ring or keep in their car, and that sensor would automatically recognize them when they pulled into that space. Again, it's just a convenience where they wouldn't have to register every time they use that space. So all of this data would be available. So you would actually see how the residents are using these spaces. But to the question that was asked, so every time a permit holder pulls into any of the camera-controlled lots, we'll know how many permit holders total are in the lot. So for example, on Islanders, there's 122 spaces there, I believe, that will have the sensor. The additional spaces will also know if there's permit holders using those spaces. So all of that data will be visible to you.
What's the cost of a fob?
The fobs are about $50 a piece. And they have the replaceable batteries, so their lifetime is, I would assume 10 plus years. So.
Thank you.
Yep. And that's all I had in the technology. If there's any more questions, I'd be happy to respond.
Patsy?
I just have a general question. I'm not sure who can respond to this, but we do have some history having had ambassadors or monitors, especially at Coligny and also Islanders Beach. So I'm just wondering what the data shows about which days have we had overcapacity? Is it by certain days of the week? Is it by certain seasons? Because I think then we're going to know a little bit about, how to apply hours of operation, seasonal, and also the fees when the town council sets those markers, hopefully by resolution. So what kind of data can you give us about what happened? I know last year, surely we had folks at those spots, maybe even the previous year, when the beach management process was elevated, I guess. So I don't know who can respond to that kind of data, because that would be helpful for us to know in determining how to set rates, I think, and hours of operation, other things.
Ms. Bryson, I can tell you, we do have some of that now. It is observational data. It is not hard. It was kept track of. But in terms of observational data, we did have staff in those areas, especially over the summer season. I can tell you unequivocally, holidays and weekends, there is, by late morning, there's an over demand as compared to capacity for parking spaces. Throughout the week, it varies depending upon the weather and some other factors. Obviously, if it's raining outside or not great weather, there's less demand. If it's beautiful weather, there's more demand. And so we know that from Memorial Day to Labor Day, especially the weekends, especially holidays, there is more demand than availability. Throughout the week, it's kind of hit or miss. Sometimes certain parks will fill up, particularly Islanders. It will be consistent about filling up kind of throughout the middle of the week. Aaron, I don't know if there's anything else you want to add to that in terms of the observational data.
Aaron Black, Facilities Manager. Just to piggyback off of what Josh was saying, Coligny lot usually on a Saturday by 10 or 11 o'clock is full. Islanders usually on a Saturday is busy. Again, to confirm Josh's statements, usually the Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday's not too bad. Holidays, depending on how they fall, are packed. But I would say on a Saturday, beautiful day in July, every beach park is almost at capacity.
Yeah. And since we're starting to implement the new technology this spring, but the town council will be considering the ordinance and parking rates and fees and hours of operation in the fall, then I think it'd be helpful for us to collect that data, since we have a means of collecting the data, so that we can know about that when we can make those decisions. So
I think we've had 3 separate comments today about collecting that data. So we've got it in the notes, and since we're going to have staff out in the field through our ambassadors and through our in-house staff, that is something that we're going to look to gather throughout this summer.
Great. And then I'll be the third voice talking about bike racks. I think it would also be helpful to know how many bike racks we have. I mean, I don't know how many is the right number. I ride a bike, as Mr. Babel knows, and have ridden all over the island where I can get to. So having bike racks in certain places, and I don't know, maybe Bike Walk can help us with suggested numbers and locations. So I think that kind of partnership would be helpful to know where we need them and how many.
Absolutely.
And the locations.
We know we need more than what we have today.
Right.
And we've got CIP projects planned for each of these parks. So there's funding available where we can explore that, and I think it'd be a great idea for us to work with them to make sure that we're on target for what those needs might be.
Right, and Bike Walk works with the bike ambassadors, so there's kind of some parity there that can help out. So.
Great. Alex, any further questions?
No, thank you for
Steve?
everything. Thank you.
Steve, any further questions at this time? Are there any questions or comments from anyone who has sat through the presentation? Thank you.
Hello, Jack Daly. I live and own a business in Forest Beach and Coligny, and I'm impressed by his technology, so there's 2 tweaks we need to do here. I have a lot of employees, and so does everyone there. If I have a kid making $10 an hour and he's paying $4 an hour to park, that's a loser. He'll work anywhere else but Coligny, and I'm okay on help, but a lot of places are not. So the idea is, we talked about validated parking. If I could have a merchant account, right, where I could go in and I could enter like my 7 employees that are coming at night, they're here, okay, and they're parking over in the beach parking. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, those are their license plates. I go on and I activate them. I just click the box, right, where the employees are, and I have the whole list of their license plates, and I can just touch them. And then $1 an hour, something less, but something less than $4 an hour, because you're going to kill businesses there. And I mean, the town's in on it too for 2% of the take, so we're all in this together on that parking. So we've got to do something with validating parking for employees, or else we're in real trouble. And I like this parking map when it showed the area. And now, when a lot of the roads in Forest Beach were originally private and they were acquired by the town, they came with the provision that there was no on-street parking. So maybe on your parking map, the mobile map, you could show those streets instead of like a happy green, maybe like a burning, throbbing red, like don't park here, right? And perhaps, since instead of like, and I don't blame staff for not wanting to control the parking there, we've got these guys looking good, they should probably manage some of those town-owned streets in Forest Beach. And by that I mean, my household, if I was on the street, since there's no parking on the street, perhaps I could park on the street, or perhaps more importantly, everyone else could not park on the street. So I could go to my street when there's a rental across from me that now has 8 cars. I could enter those, or I could request a parking meter person to come by and zap those license plates and then find them as well, okay? So we've got to catch the bleed over, as they like to call it. And we've been worried about this in Forest Beach for 30, 40 years, and that's why when we gave up those roads, we put in the strong conditions like, town, thank you for taking the roads and paving them, but there's no on-street parking, and we're not a public parking district. So something needs to be done on that app, and it's not many locals that live there that could show you a driver's license and a property tax bill that they live in Forest Beach. It's fewer and fewer by the day. But there needs to be some accommodation there where perhaps they could, if you have 2 kids in your house, they could park on the street, but definitely not allow people to skirt our short-term rental ordinance about parking and just park up and down the streets, or the road parking that's going to spill over. And Steve, you know, if it's $20, $30 a day to park in Coligny, it's 10 in Sea Pines. So, you know, we've got to, there's bleed over. It's not just Forest Beach that's going to get bled over. They'll go right till they hit that Ocean Gate for $10, and that's going to be, you and Frank have to sort that out. But, so I like this group, I like the technology, but we can capture those 2 concerns in this plan. So we'll have to upgrade to cover non-parking residential streets, and then some kind of valet, or whatever you want to call it, parking validation for employees. Thank you.
Thank you, Jack. Are there any other comments? Has that provoked thought?
Yes, just a little bit. I'd like to have I guess, a sidebar with Mr. Daly, that I need to figure out where you can still hire somebody at $10 an hour. But seriously, the validation piece, I guess it sparked another thought, and this is for staff. Sea Pines runs a very successful employee shuttle program during the busier months. And, you know, maybe this is something that we need to explore, because even if you are putting an employee into the paid parking, you are still taking up parking spaces. So the whole mitigation idea as to how we deal with, you know, our businesses in the area, I think needs to be expanded. Not necessarily a conversation around PCI, I think it's a further conversation for us to have.
And I agree. I think it's all of these details that we're talking about now that are going to be critically important moving forward. And as you were speaking with regard to how many employees use that beach parking, each time that happens, it takes away an available spot, whether it's for a resident or a visitor. But we want them all to have opportunity. An employee shuttle parking system might have a great conversation to be had around it. And I wonder, to Mr. Daly's point, how we cross over and connect, I guess, with GovOS in terms of those short-term rentals. That is going to be, I think, the biggest loophole that we really need to tease out and make sure we've thought of each and every one of the concerns moving forward. And while so far my experience with GovOS hasn't been great, I do believe and anticipate them moving up and us being able to cross-reference an awful lot of this information. So, anyone else? We have council members here, and I certainly do appreciate you both for coming and sitting through this important meeting. If you have any questions or concerns at this time? No?
I really don't need to make this point because it's been made, but I am going to make it because I think it's so fundamentally important. And that is that we are concentrating on something that deals with half the issue. And that is a structure to deal with parking within prescribed parking lots. It's outside of those parking lots that we're going to have the most intractable problem. And I think that we should be asking staff and the consultant to delve into our options of dealing with those bleed over issues, because they're the ones that are going to create the biggest problem for us, considering off-island growth and so on and so forth. So I just think that it's not a single issue, it's a combination of both those issues in equal importance. Thank you.
Thank you, David. And I guess that was one of the reasons I had talked about, or may asked the question at the wrong time to the wrong person with regard to any preliminary work that's been done to jumpstart when we kick this off. I'm assuming, since there are so many details that need to be picked up, that staff is into this with both hands full, trying to make sure that we get this as right as humanly possible prior to us implementing that. And to David's point, I think the collaboration between code on those outside areas and PCI is going to be critical, because that unintended consequence my first duty is to my residents on this island, which means across the entire island. And I do not want to see them suffer because of something that we've done that we could have done better. And we know going in that we should be paying attention to. And I think that may have something to do with the maps, to Jack's point, that we need to be really clean about those maps and make sure that there's nothing there that would indicate, yes, you can park when you can't. Anything else from anyone on our committee that they'd like to share or express at this point? Thank you all for the incredible wealth of information that you've shared with us. Hopefully, we've given you good feedback, and we look forward to the next conversation moving forward. If you need anything from us, we're here, and appreciate you. All right, meeting adjourned. Is that okay? Did you miss anything?